Well, good evening, everybody. We don't know if you're there yet, so we need you to use the chat and the Facebook comments. Give me a wave if you're there, please.
There it is, four of us.
Yeah, this is all very disconcerting, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
So this is, we are highly privileged to have three brothers here, the Kuhrt brothers, Martin, John, and Stephen, and to give us a lively discussion on family, friction, and faith. And please, if you have any words of encouragement and you want to ask some questions, use the chat facility in the Facebook posts. It would really encourage the guys here.
Yeah.
And it would stop us drying up as well. So
yeah, because we're quite nervous.
So I'm a bit worried that Stephen won't have enough to say.
Yeah,
I'm worried the words won't flow.
He's been on an overcoming shyness course, as he often tells us.
Right. Yeah.
And so no, I'll get you to introduce yourselves first of all. Now, I have no idea. I have not got time to check whether actually live.
I think 12 people are watching at least.
How do you know that?
Because it says 12 and next to an eye in the corner.
Oh, I got 15 on my eye.
Oh,
okay.
Well, that's
yeah. So join in the chat so we know who you are, everyone.
I've got 15 actually. Yeah.
Oh, I can't. See, I'm not used to this yet.
Hey, John, we're in your hands. You're in charge.
Left-hand corner.
John, far away. We've only got an hour. Let's get going.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yes. Yeah. You're quite right. We need to get moving.
Yeah.
So look, I'll tell you what. Let's give a quick introduction. So, Martin, who are you, Martin?
I'm Martin. I'm the oldest of us three, and currently I am a vicar in Aylesbury, church leader in the Church of England, and I've got a wife, Anna, and 4 children, ranging from Ben, 18, Harry, 16, Ollie, 13, and Elsie, 7. And we've got 3 lovely golden retrievers who we breed from, so we have occasional puppy litters as well. So it's a busy household, but it's great to be here this evening. Thanks, John, for setting this up.
Over to you, John.
Over to me. Great. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, my name's John. I am the littlest. I'm the youngest of our family. I live in South London in Streatham, and I'm the only one actually of us who isn't a church leader. So, rebellion is pretty unusual in our family. I go to a Baptist church. That's what. You
didn't even marry a vicar's daughter like Martin and I did you?
Exactly. Very disappointing.
I married an ordinary girl.
Well, yeah, she'll love watching that. You describe her as that. So I'm married to Nikki, and we live in Streatham. We've got 3 kids, Danny, Tom, and Jenna, and we've only got 1 dog. So Martin's already started the competitiveness. What a menagerie he's got. And I've always worked with homeless people for the last sort of 25 years, managing hostels and running services for people rough sleeping, mainly in central London. And now I work as an advisor in the government's rough sleepers team. And I specialise in how churches and faith groups respond to homelessness. So it's great to be here.
And Stephen.
Yep, I'm the difficult middle one. And I am a vicar in New Malden, which is near Kingston, a sort of suburb of Kingston, Christchurch, New Malden. I'm married to Katie. I've got twins, Rebecca and James, who are 23. I've got a prospective son-in-law, because Rebecca's just got engaged, called James. And I've got a 17-year-old daughter called Abigail as well. And no dogs, but 2 guinea pigs. Yeah, so which take a lot of looking after, much more difficult than having dogs. You have to take them for walks twice a day, and do all sorts of things.
Just one little thing, Stephen.
Yeah.
For the next stage, what is a vicar?
A vicar, good question.
Like Geraldine Granger, is it?
Do you know what? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what Martin says on this. I don't think there's any one definite answer to that. But a vicar, I suppose, would always be someone who sort of leads a church, leads the stuff that goes on in the church, although, other people carry responsibility for it as well. But someone who, gives talks about God and about Jesus, someone who tries to help people to discover how they can follow God as well, or follow God more effectively in their lives, or follow God for the first time. I suppose that would be my take. Martin, would you say that's an error? Was that
I think that's a pretty good explanation of what a vicar does. I mean, we're ordained into the Church of England, which means that we take vows in front of God to serve God in a particular way, and some ordained people are chaplains in hospitals or the armed forces or schools, but others are clergy who look after parishes. So that's an area of land with at least one church congregation, and we really take responsibility for leading the Anglican Christians, members of the Church of England, in the parish, in their worship and discipleship. So yeah, that's what we do, really. But it's very varied.
I understand, obviously, you're going to have one busy day of the week, when you're, on show. But I mean, what do you do for the rest of the week?
Beat up, really. But you get paid for it, so it's pretty good. No, there's a lot of looking after when you're running any sort of church, really, and sometimes it's the smaller churches that people are in, where the vicar's doing an awful lot of work by themselves, him or herself. But there's quite a lot of organisation to do. There's quite a lot of care of people to do. So people have ups and downs in their lives, and the idea is that we're there to support them and help them. And quite a lot of planning and things like taking funerals. I took a funeral just today over in Croydon. It was a friend's dad, actually, and the job there was to try to mark and celebrate the guy's life. Bill, a very nice guy who had died at the age of 87, who I knew as a teenager, and to help people to sort of mourn and process their grief, but also to try and hold out a bit of hope and help people in that way. And that's an important part of what us vicars do as well, really. But it's really though, I wouldn't want to make too much of a distinction between vicars and Christians, because all Christians are really, the idea is that we're all trying to serve God in different ways, and being a vicar is just one particular way of serving God. But people do it in their jobs, people do it in their, if they're caring for, as a full-time carer for their mother or whatever, people have got all sorts of different ways of being Christians.
Yeah, we're doing a series in our church.
My question for you and Martin, do vicars have a hotline to God?
Well, actually, no, not really, because anyone can come to God through the Lord Jesus. That's what we teach. So actually, and particularly as Church of England, Protestant, evangelical Christians, we tend to emphasize the fact that you can go straight to God through Jesus. You don't have to find a holy person like a saint, either dead or alive, to pray through. We can actually have a relationship with God through Jesus. And as vicars, we have no sort of special hotline, although hopefully church leaders are people who've demonstrated that they have a living faith, and certainly you can't lead a church in your own strength. You have to be praying all the time. I think someone said, I think it was Smith Wigglesworth said that I rarely pray for more than half an hour, but I hardly ever go more than half an hour without praying. And I identify with that, because all the time I'm asking God to help me do things that I don't feel I'm able to do in my own strength.
And do people treat you differently when you've got your dog collar on?
I have to say that they sometimes.
You've got to be careful. When you're wearing a dog collar, you have to be careful when you're driving a car, in case road rage comes upon you. And suddenly you have to get a dog collar. So it certainly changes when you're wearing a dog collar. I'm sorry, Martin, I interrupted you.
Well, no. I mean, that's a good point. People do notice, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing if you're not getting road rage and you're letting people, you're driving courteously. But I think it swings and roundabouts, because for some people a dog collar might put them off. It might kind of create an image that you're aloof and maybe a bit holier than thou, and they've got to mind their P's and Q's, and help, there's a religious person coming along. But other times it can open doors. So going to a hospital wearing a dog collar, you find that people will treat you as someone who's there to help and to minister to people who are in a lot of suffering.
You can jump queues, Martin, with a dog collar. In the bank, when you jump the queue in.
I've never tried it, Stephen, but
nor have I. It's interesting how some people will treat you differently in a way that in some ways can be quite positive. When you're wearing a dog collar, people will start up conversations about God a lot more quickly. I've been at train stations where I've been coming back from a meeting and I've still got my clerical collar on, and people have wanted to start talking in a way that I think probably they wouldn't have, well, they definitely wouldn't have, if they hadn't seen me sort of wearing my clerical collar. So I think it's got quite a lot of advantages, really. It's not too ostentatious, but it does show fairly clearly that you are someone who's very keen to talk to people about God, or should be.
Thank you. Good answers.
Actually, there was one thing that we were talking about driving. One thing I know about Martin, he does happen to be the leader of the church, my church, is that he's an excellent driver. That's true, isn't it, Martin?
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. I did borrow a friend's car, and he had one of these black boxes for his son to make the insurance cheaper. And as I confessed to the congregation, I borrowed the car for 2 weeks. And when I sent it back, they said that they then heard from their insurance company that their son's driving had deteriorated markedly over the last 2 weeks, and their insurance was going to be raised a bit. So my family found that deep vindication for their complaints about my driving. But Ben is learning to drive at the moment, and I've taught him all my bad habits, and the professional driving instructor is trying to straighten him out before his test. But we'll see if he
see, John passed his driving test first time, Martin passed it second time, I passed my driving test fifth time. Years. And I only got through because I had a very bossy curate at my church, Helen Hancock. She's the sort of assistant vicar. And she wanted one part of our relationship where she was in charge of me. So she taught me to drive and got me through my test by being sort of, fairly directional and stuff. But yeah, 22 years it took me to learn to drive. So,
I love the way bossy became slightly directional then.
What, on Helen?
Yeah.
Yeah, but she's not. She's at a governor's meeting. But I think some of her church might be watching this. They can pass it on.
Good.
But,
and you've been an inspiration to me about perseverance, Stephen. So
yeah, it's funny. It's funny actually. It's a good example of something where I thought it was an absolute mountain that I just in no way could pass this driving test. Because once you fail a driving test twice, I think it all becomes psychological, and and so it was actually a good example. While I joke about it, it was a good example of what can happen when a close friend says, I will accompany you and to this goal. And so it was actually a very powerfully Christian thing, because, when you've got encouragement, particularly with someone sort of coming alongside you, it's amazing what can then happen. So I see that as a vital example, actually, of the way I benefited from someone identifying something that I was really quite, fearful of and had given up on, really. And I think a big job of vicars, but all Christians, is to help people through all sorts of difficult things, obstacles, tricky things, to encourage us to I often talk about trying to help people become the people God made them to be. And that can have all sorts of applications. But it's really about being able to fulfill your potential. And usually we need others to help us. We aren't really made as human beings, I think, to do stuff by ourselves. We're made to do it in company with others. So I joke about it, but actually it's a very serious example.
Nice segue, I thought there. Nice illustration.
Nice what? A segue?
Yeah.
I thought we were trying to avoid jargon.
Well, you just shifted nicely. I'm just trying to get us back onto what we're supposed to be talking about.
What are we supposed to be talking about?
I don't know, John might help us.
Because we haven't talked about John's work and stuff like that.
We've got into 16 minutes here, and we're just getting off at a starter, aren't we? Really?
We are.
So and I had the first question I had in my mind, because I know Martin, and I don't know Stephen and John hardly, but I do know that your dad is a vicar as well.
Oh yeah.
I think I think a little bit disapproving of John's association with the Baptists. Sorry, but but you grew
No,
up.
he was brought up as a Baptist, so he's not actually.
That's covered the friction element of the. We can get on to the rest now. What's your question, John?
So my question is, what was it like growing up in a vicarage, and did that influence your lives in any way? That's free. So who would like to answer that?
Well, I'm going to kick off.
Yeah.
I think there were loads of good things. Really, looking back, I mean, firstly, you get a nice nice big house. That's always a bonus. And we lived in a good area, and we're part of a very active church, especially for the major period that I was kind of a teenager. You were part of a big community. There was a lot going on. There was a great youth group. There was a lot of children's work, a lot of friends and people connected, with the church. So that was all really good. I think one of the things that's a little bit of a challenge is you're sort of semi-public as a family. You're a little bit on show. And I don't think I liked that much. I didn't really like that. I think Stephen probably relished it a bit more.
Yeah.
But I mean, I didn't really like the fact that people would make comments about my dad's job and this kind of thing. And I think probably a bit more deeply, I found quite a lot of church quite boring, really. And I think I had to separate a little bit the actual message of Christianity from sort of church culture. And I think that's hard to separate when you're growing up kind of immersed in it. I describe it's a bit like being sort of marinated in the church, and it's what you know. And I think that gives you a lot of good things, and it's taught me a lot, and it's stuff I look back on and appreciate. But I think that was probably one of the things. And I had to find my own beliefs out of that context, really. And of course it contributed, but I think faith really made sense once I'd left, and I'd gone away. It's things like summer camps and other forms where really faith came alive to me.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to go next?
Well,
are you going to go next, Stephen?
Yeah. Oh, you go next, Martin. That's all right.
No, up to you.
Well,
I've worked out that Stephen's the noisy one, isn't he?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I can say a bit. I mean, basically, I did, I think, really enjoy it. Partly because you did get quite a lot of attention, which I thought was okay. But I think the major thing was an awful lot of kind people giving you that attention. And I didn't really fully realise this until I was older and realised that not everyone sort of had that. But to be in the centre of a community, growing up with a lot of very kind adults, being very supportive and encouraging, partly because you had a bit more profile, I think, made a real impact on me. So it was something I quite enjoyed. I suppose I went to a Church of England secondary school where there were quite a few other vicars' kids and stuff. So I was never particularly, I never felt it was particularly odd. There were, when I joined secondary school, my two close friends were Baptist ministers' sons, actually. So yeah, but it was it was okay. I was thinking about this afternoon. I can't think of any particular negatives with it. It was something I enjoyed really. But what about you, Martin?
Well, yeah, I certainly identify with what you said about being in a community where there's a lot of love. A lot of lovely people, older folk will give you a great big hug, and of course we've forgotten what hugging is like in these days of the pandemic. But people who would just sort of envelop you in love, really, and that they pray for you as well, and a lot of kind, lovely people. And I think being brought up in an atmosphere of faith is great. Having parents. Observing them following Jesus through good times and not so easy times. I mean, one of the things perhaps for me, when we moved down to Croydon, I was 13 and we'd been living in a village in Staffordshire. And certainly I felt that to be a downside at the time, the dislocation involved in moving, because Dad felt called to a new job. And, you know, I remember as an 8-year-old sort of bursting into, as a 13-year-old actually bursting into tears when I was told that we'd be moving. And it took me a while to get used to living in the suburbs of London, coming from a village. And I think I felt a bit hacked off for some of the time. But then in retrospect, I think what I lost, I gained in other ways, new experiences, and we were in a bigger church and more people around. So, you know, that swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, my memory, Martin, is that I burst into tears. We were called into Mum and Dad's bedroom. I remember this very clearly. We sat on the bed. I burst in tears because John was little. He followed suit and burst in tears. But you didn't. I remember you being quite sort of, you know, philosophical about it. You know, well,
I think that's because they told me first, and I cried. I tried crying, and then I got my act together for when they told you. I think.
I didn't know that. I'm only learning this. I thought we were all had it revealed to us at the same time.
Yeah, this is like online therapy.
Yeah.
I was the one who cried.
It makes sense now. It's like whatever happened to Baby Jane. If I'd known that all these years, we could have been close.
But you do get a bit of stick for being a son of a vicar. I mean, you get some very odd things. People assume. I mean, when I was younger, some of my friends assumed I actually lived in a Victorian church building all the time. You know, and others questioned whether. If my father was ordained, you know, he should be married at all. I think they came from a Catholic background and thought that, you know, priests shouldn't marry and that sort of thing. But not all of the stick was friendly. But then I think it helped teach me that actually sometimes you've just got to be willing to accept that other people aren't always going to see things the way you do, and not be afraid to be independent and not really care what other people think. So I think that did help me to some extent.
Susie Burris just asked a question about the phone going in meal times. And actually, this was before answer phones, wasn't it? And the phone did go a lot during meal times, didn't it? So Susie is right on that. But that was quite good fun. You know, when you got, I remember getting a phone call for Dad from George Carey, actually, before he was Archbishop of Canterbury, and he was bishop. And I said, "Who's speaking?" He said, "The Bishop of Bath and Wells." And I said, "What, the baby-eating Bishop of Bath and Wells?" Because I'd watched Blackadder, you see. So there were good moments where, you know, you could even moments like that.
Yeah. I hope it didn't harm our job prospects, the fact the baby-eating Bishop of Bath and Wells.
I think for me, I mean, there's that. I really appreciate being connected to something of real depth, and a couple of moments really strike me when, you know, I've had a close friend die, and also in my work had someone I was working with in a hostel die in a tragic accident, and Dad, on both occasions, Dad was able to do the funeral and a memorial service, and things like that have been really powerful for me, and they're ways in which faith has really made sense. You know, that space where you need a message of hope and of comfort, and, you know, the sort of ability to call on Dad for things like that have been really significant for me. So I think some of my, you know, it certainly wasn't bad. But I think disentangling the message from some of the maybe the middle class church baggage that I, you know, that I sort of felt growing up. You know, I guess I've lived in quite different areas than the one we grew up in, and I think, you know, that's been sort of just part of my journey, really. And
that's partly, John, because in the 80s, the 1980s, when we were growing up at Emmanuel South Croydon, fantastic church. But do you think it was because back then church was still pretty much to look after the faithful, as it were, people who came to church? Whereas I would say a big change 30 years on is that most churches, certainly if they're growing or successful, are very outward focused. They just have to be. You know, people just don't come to church by habit. in the way that they once did. And, one of the reasons I'm excited about being a vicar now, and I think I would have found it harder back in the 70s or 80s, is there's such a missional agenda. The job of being a vicar now is so obviously you've got to be out there in the community, trying to connect God's love with people, meeting people where they are, caring for them. And I think some of the church, that we would have grown up with probably wouldn't have seemed quite as dramatic as it seems now. To me, one of the things I never want church to be is boring. What you were saying, I think church should never be boring. And if it is, it should just be an exception where something's gone wrong. Church should be dynamic and exciting.
Yeah. So one of the examples of that, one of the things that really, really made a difference for me was getting involved in this holiday club that we all got involved in up in Islington. And that was something that our church was involved in. And that really had a big transformational effect on my life, basically, because we got involved. And that form of faith really, really made sense to me, that we were going into an area of a lot of deprivation and difficulty. And Stephen got beaten up there just to sort of, win his spurs. And basically, I was invited to move into that area by the church when I was in my early 20s, and that really that had a massive effect on my whole life, really, actually. And it was such a different area than growing up, and I think I realised, how privileged we were, really.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing. It's not to be taken lightly. But I think faith that really, really makes a difference, that combats poverty, transforms people's lives, makes a real practical difference, is the sort of emphasis that I've really, that's really made most sense to me. And they're the people who've inspired me. And, so I'm really grateful to the fact that we did that experience up in Islington.
Yeah, it was great, wasn't it? I mean, this holiday club was in, a very deprived part of London, and John did the teenagers. I think Martin did as well. I did the 7 to 11s. But you had these kids from 10 in the morning till 3:30 or something. They brought a lunch with them, and but it was really exciting, and it felt. And I think, in my experience, a lot of people who sort of join churches and become Christians today. Sometimes it can be because people have an aware of a real sort of sense of spiritual plight and they want an answer to that. But more often, I find people want meaning and significance to their lives. They want to join up to something which makes sense, where they can contribute their gifts and their energy. So one of the most exciting things we do at our church is a night shelter for homeless people. And John, can say more about this sort of thing because it's his work. But actually, so many people who come and help on our night shelter, sometimes they haven't belonged to our church for very long, but at the end of the evening they say things like, I absolutely loved that, it was a fantastic, and they've been really aware that they're involved in something hugely significant, and sometimes they need it a bit unpacked and explained about what might be going on there. But it's a very good entree into what Christianity is all about, really, because if for that evening people are giving up an evening and trying to serve people who are in a very vulnerable position and finding they're getting back an enormous amount through doing that, then everything about Christianity starts to make a lot more sense, because they've had that sort of experience, they've had that taste of what it really is about. But John, that's your field, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and I think yes, it really inspires me to see the way that faith. When I was 18, I had a job as a cleaner. I had to be up at the Strand at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was really, really shocked by how many rough sleepers there were up on the Strand, and that had a big effect on me. I went and studied social work, and then, as I said, went into work with homeless people. But it really inspires my faith that the world of homelessness has been so affected by Christians. So organisations that a lot of people would have heard of, like Shelter and Centrepoint and Crisis, were established by church leaders, all of them. And then up and down the country, as Stephen said, there's all kinds of churches, like Martin and Stephen's churches have both been involved in night shelters, and obviously you've got things like food banks and debt centres and a whole range of social action. And I think that is, as Steve said, is a really good sort of introduction for people. They want to see not a load of good ideas by themselves, but things that are transformative, that make a difference. And I think, the interesting thing is churches can host these things and actually have quite a lot of different people involved, but also help people connect with the message that's inspired the whole thing. You can't be disconnected. It's like faith is like the roots and it produces fruits, and they're both really, really critical. So we've got to be, we've got to tend to the roots, but also got to be fruity.
I like that. Yeah, and I think in Aylesbury, in a kind of medium-sized sort of town, this is perhaps a bit more difficult in London, but in a town like Aylesbury, the churches really have to work together to make an impact across the town, which we want to do. And in the 13 years I've been here, I've been quite involved with the Aylesbury Church Network, and so through that we have been able to do things that individual churches can't to really make an impact. So we've run festivals in the town centre in the park, and one Sunday a year we had an open air service. The first time we did that, John came and spoke, and we started running family fun events in the park. We've started up street angels and town centre chaplains, that's just ordinary Christians, being involved in the public places like the shopping centres, the courts, the police station.
Street pastors, Martin? Street angels?
Yeah, street angels is just another name for street pastors.
What do they do, street angels?
But the street angels, they go out on Friday and Saturday nights, and they're really there to be a Christian sort of presence in the town centre to offer practical help to anyone who needs it. So sometimes people do get worse for wear, and they might, or younger people, women especially, might be vulnerable, and so the street angels help them to get a taxi home, or give them flip-flops if they're wearing high heels and they take them off for comfort. They might tread on broken glass, so they give out flip-flops so they don't tread on anything that would damage them. They have conversations with people who are depressed, or a lot of people go out with the intention of enjoying themselves. They have a few drinks and then they sort of think about their lives and might actually get really depressed and even suicidal. And also we've noticed that the presence of the street angels calms things down if there are tensions with people not going into clubs and things. The police absolutely love the street angels because they always feel that the atmosphere is better when the street angels are around. And a lot of the stuff that street angels do, the police don't really want to do, helping people get home and looking after people who are worse for wear, or just sometimes just calming a situation which could become explosive. So that's an example.
But Martin, what would you say to people who said to you, say someone in your church or in another church says to you, look, all that stuff, I mean, that's sort of, helping people, but what's that got to do with the message about God? I mean, anyone could be a nice person. Well, what's that got to do with being a Christian?
Yeah, well, I think everyone who is a street angel has to be a committed member of a church in Aylesbury, has to be a committed Christian. And the idea is that it's showing God's love in a practical way, and certainly responding to the questions that do come, like, oh, why do you do this? Because that's really the best form of evangelism, which is a jargon word that simply means sharing our faith in Jesus. And so the people who've been helped at no cost by volunteers, giving up their nights, and of course many of them are working, and it's quite costly. So it's a demonstration of sacrificial love, and a lot of the time they get questions like, why are you doing this? And some people have been very impressed by the fact that the street angels are all from different churches, because they've been told that all Christians are disunited. They're all different denominations, and they all believe different things, and Christians can't work together. But they see that actually they do work together, and that makes a big impact as well. So yeah, it is about bringing Jesus into the town centre, and into the darker places, sometimes the riskier places, and people are just very impacted by what they do.
And I think what makes a difference when Christians do this stuff, anyone can be and can be wonderfully kind and make a huge impact, and churches should be endorsing that and encouraging that, not in any way disparaging it. But I think the difference that it makes having a Christian faith is that it's the faith element of it. So if you believe that every act of kindness, however small, has got God's powerful love behind it, then that's a huge motivation to keep going when it seems, from a human point of view, totally pointless. So I think motivation is massively helped by a Christian faith, because you really believe that you're tapping into something that's much bigger. At this funeral today, I did a funeral of a guy who was incredibly kind and made a massive difference, very practical guy, and also always helping people. And I spoke a little bit about kindness punching above its weight. And the Bible does talk about kindness, and kindness quite often is small, very undramatic acts that aren't going to make anyone famous or get them a fortune, but they possess this strange power to punch above their weight. Someone can be having a terrible day, and an act of kindness, very small act of kindness, sometimes can make a massive difference. And I think as a Christian, I believe, and probably we all believe this, that the reason, the logic behind that is that there's a supernatural power from God which is at work, particularly when people sort of get out of their comfort zone and do stuff that they don't need to. And quite often God's power, I believe, can work most powerfully when we're at our most vulnerable, when it seems most hopeless and helpless,
And I think that's why that makes sense of, it's not just a coincidence that Christians set up all these homeless charities, or it's not a coincidence that, Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, the powerhouse of that movement was local churches. Obviously, it wasn't limited to them, and it was a bigger movement. But I think throughout a lot of social change and reform movements, whether that's anti-slavery or child labour in factories, there is people who believe in something bigger energizing that and resourcing. And I think this, maybe for people listening, this is important because there's this whole scope that faith can be transformative, from the smallest things to the biggest things. And this ability, as Martin said earlier, for Jesus to be able to directly transform someone's life on an individual personal level is true and vital, but it doesn't stop there. It's not about a personal ticket to heaven that means I'm sorted out and that's the end of it. It's actually resources to help you change your own life and change the world around you. And I think that integrity, that connection, because especially at the moment, there's so much mental health challenges, and that they've been relevant for I know for us, in our family, all these challenges on a very personal, individual level, which are so vital, and people are so struggling with fear and depression and all kinds of challenges and anxiety. But also we've got massive big problems, racism and poverty and homelessness and all kinds of things. And faith's got the ability to affect all of these things.
Can I throw a rock in at this stage, which might be a little bit controversial, and I wonder whether you agree with this. But all that stuff you've said, which I totally believe in, my view is that one of the biggest problems that means that people aren't attracted to Christianity, and that people within churches very often are not doing all that dynamic stuff that we've talked about, is that the view persists that Christianity is basically all about getting to heaven when you die. It's about getting that spiritual ticket. And yes, there are ethical things that we should be doing in the meantime, but when all's said and done, it's about getting to that destination. And the reason I bring this up is because I feel that vicars and clergy can sometimes be very worried about offending their core base, their congregations. But I see that as the biggest single sort of confused thinking that I think contributes to the church not doing its job. And what the Bible talks about is creation being restored and renewed, and heaven, God's dimension, and earth as being joined together. And that makes sense of all the stuff we're talking about. That makes sense of doing night shelters. That makes sense of doing street angels and things like that. Because what we're doing is we're trying to build something now that God will one day complete, rather than he'll scrub all that and do something completely different. But I wonder what you think on that, Martin. Do you? Because I think often we try and hedge our bets on this, and we try and have a bob each way. But I think that Christianity is not about going to heaven when you die. That is, there is an element of truth in that, but that is basically making a small penultimate part of our story into the end game of it all. And I think it causes havoc personally.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree that going to heaven when we die is not any kind of escape from the real issues of justice and stewardship of the earth, because I think the Bible does teach that one day heaven and earth will come together, and that it will be a very physical thing. We'll have resurrected bodies. There'll be things to do. It won't be boring sitting on a cloud, with nothing to do in an eternity with which to do it. That's an awful picture. I think to really believe in heaven is to really understand that we can have a foretaste of it now, that we can help bring God's kingdom in. That's what we're called to pray. Your kingdom come, Lord, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I actually don't think there should be a trade-off between thinking about heaven and thinking about loving people on earth. I mean, one of the people that John mentioned, Lord Shaftesbury, no one really did more for the oppressed people of the 19th century. The children working up the chimneys, the people working ridiculous hours in factories, who campaigned for them for limited working hours, for education for children, for care of the mentally ill. Lord Shaftesbury did all these things, and yet he was very aware of Jesus' promise that he would come again. He believed fervently in the second coming and the end times, and he looked forward.
But that is crucial. You see, I think that heaven is vital, but heaven is God's present dimension. What I'm protesting about is heaven as final destination. If people understand us as going to a different place that's got nothing to do with the earth, then I think that's an escapist understanding. And I think a lot of churches play up to this. A lot of our worship songs, you can have a sermon that's all about the sort of stuff we were talking about earlier, and then a couple of worship songs just ruin it because they say, well, it's all that because it's about going to another place where the streets shine and all this. They take biblical language, but they misapply it. And I don't know whether we need to be a bit more feisty about this. It's a message people often don't like to hear, because an escapist Christianity is what a lot of people do quite like. But I think nothing turns the outside world off Christianity than when they see it as essentially escapist, rather than roll up your sleeves and get on with bringing God's kingdom.
Yeah, I think we need a hope that people need a hope that really, really inspires them, that comforts them, and inspires them to action, challenges them to action. And I think that's what biblical Christianity does. I mean, it's interesting, you know, Mark said, you know, religion is the opium of the masses, and quite a lot of the time you can see why he said that, because if it's just a drug that makes you feel good for a couple of hours, you know, I've worked a lot with heroin users, and you know, they feel great when they take heroin, and everything's right with the world for the time, you know, while the hit lasts, but then it fades and it's destructive. And I think we've got to be really honest about, you know, for all of the Christian heroes of Martin Luther King, Lord Shaftesbury, etc., all these people, you know, the people that they were fighting against were often other church-going Christians who believed in the opposite, and upholding. And I think being honest about those failures is important, because you know, even the Bible is very honest about the failures of the church, and the sinfulness or the brokenness of the church. And you know, lots of people have experienced that, and you know, we shouldn't downplay or dismiss that, but that doesn't mean that the hope that it's all rested on isn't real and transformative. And you know, in my job, I'm so fortunate because my job's all about the way that churches and faith groups respond to need and homelessness, and I just see amazing things every day. And local councils say to me, you know, don't know what we'd do without the local churches. You know, faith really makes sense to people because it's clothed in action, and it really corresponds to stuff in the, you know, what Jesus said about, you know, good deeds, and you know, and it's really inspiring to think that, you know, whatever you do that's good, that's full of faith, hope, and love, will endure. It won't fade and you know, be meaningless. It'll endure, and there's a real weight of our lives. You know, we've got, a lot of us have got great opportunities to make a difference. You know, whether to neighbours or friends or you know, family, and you know, people need, I think, a message which has the power to overcome their own brokenness, their resentments, and the things that they feel, you know, broken inside about, that can help them overcome those and face outwards again.
Do you think one of the most important things Christians can do, perhaps Martin could come to this, is, because you've done this very well recently, I think, is admit a bit of vulnerability. You know, say, actually, my life has been quite hard. You know, share a bit of the story of our lives. Say, you know, we're not the finished product whatsoever. You know, we've had all sorts of ups and downs. There are things we've struggled with in the past. We've struggled with now. I mean, you've spoken quite powerfully about that recently at your church, haven't you, Martin? I think that's helped quite a lot of people.
Well, I did a series on mental health and mental illness because during the pandemic, I was aware that many people were struggling with these issues. And in doing this, I felt it was right to share a bit of my own testimony and struggles with depression over the years. And yes, I think that essentially the being a Christian is not saying, look, I've got everything sorted, I'm perfect. It's being really honest about our weaknesses and our frailties, and you know, explaining how through these things that the Lord has actually worked in our lives. Often it is through pain and struggle that we are brought closer to God. When everything is going swimmingly, we're very tempted to just sail on by and perhaps live in a rather selfish way, just to you know, live for pleasure, or you know, it's when we struggle against really difficult things that I think sometimes we're pushed into pressing into God and really thinking, you know, what is life all about? You know, what is of eternal importance, rather than just transitory, and so, you know, I think I think there is redemption in suffering. God brings good things out of things that are not good in themselves, and yeah, I mean, just to go back about, you know, the heaven thing, I mean, I think that it is important we very much keep the eternal perspective, because in this life, you know, we'll never overcome completely the the pull of sin and the difficulties, and justice will never be fully established until Jesus comes again. But it's because we have the hope of heaven, which is not pie in the sky when you die or floating on a cloud. It's actually the earth being renewed and transformed.
That's why I think we shouldn't call it the hope of heaven, because I think when we call it the hope of heaven, that's a shorthand I think most people understand in an escapist way. And I think if we talk about new creation, as the Bible does, and new heavens, new earth, you know, if we're precise on the language the Bible uses, I think we avoid slipping in to and it's understandable, you know, when you do a funeral, people want to know where their loved one has gone, and I believe, you know, that if they've had that, you know, we can be sure if they've had a relationship with God that they've gone to be with Jesus. So I don't believe it's inaccurate to say that when people die, they go to heaven, they go to be with Jesus because Jesus is in heaven. But that's the penultimate chapter of their story. The final chapter, and the really important one, is when the dead are raised and creation's restored, and I believe that has rather been lost. When I was a kid growing up, Emmanuel, I remember we'd say the creed and we'd say, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And I knew that Jesus rose from the dead, but I thought, what's the resurrection of the dead? And I assumed, I think as a kid, it was fancy metaphor for going to heaven when you die. And no one really ever reconciled that. So it was only when I was around about 29, 30 that I suddenly realized that actually it wasn't good enough to talk about going to heaven when you die, that wasn't grossly inaccurate, but it wasn't the full picture of the Christian hope, which then, because we were doing that holiday club in Islington and all those things, all of that made so much more sense once I got my thinking a bit more clear.
I think it's interesting thinking, coming back to obviously the fact we're all brothers, which is probably the sort of defining reason why we're doing this, you know, why we're talking about things. And I think it's worth saying that I think this issue of maintaining faith through struggle and through difficulty is something that's always really struck me about our parents, and especially with our dad, with what he went through as a child, which you know, just so people know, you know, he was the son of missionary parents, but had, you know, really chronic serious illness when he was young, and struggles with disability, and it meant he was living really back in the UK without his parents for many years. And it's kind of all the ingredients for rejecting Christianity, I think. You know, but actually, you know, obviously we're saying, you know, he went on to become a clergyman, and I think him sharing his own story of struggle, especially with our grandchildren, has been really significant. And for me, example of what you said, Martin, about redemption, that, you know, that power of God's love to redeem a situation that could be easily full of bitterness and resentment. And I'm not saying it's not easy. You know, it's been very challenging, but ultimately, I think that has a big effect on me. You know, it makes me think I want my children to be able to look at my life and see that faith wasn't just something sung on a Sunday morning about, or just grace before meals, but something that enables me to overcome, you know, my own weaknesses, my own challenges, short-sightedness. You know,
you pick that out, John, because our dad's had a similar impact on me and our mum, and it will be, in my point of view, because I hear all that stuff about the tough times, which I've seen, but for me it was the sort of integrity of our parents as I was growing up in the everyday. You know, it was interesting that was the bit that made a particular impact on me. So there were the tough times they'd gone through, particularly our dad. But to me, it was the everyday sort of integrity of decisions. That was the thing that really inspired me and made an impact on me, which is related to what you've said, but just a slightly different example of it, really.
Yeah, I think the toughest times for Mum was probably when you were learning to drive. to be honest.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, that really was.
It actually showed so much integrity there. She got really annoyed with me. Actually, forget everything I've just said.
Yes, but this thing of integrity, of doing, like faith making a difference when no one's looking.
Yeah.
Of it being able to reach into your, most tricky areas of your life, and I think that's what the cross is all about. That God, the God who created the world, doesn't just sit far away, but came to earth, took on the very, very worst of what the world can do, and the death by an imperial power, and the rejection by religious authorities, the betrayal of friends, being all alone, ultimate rejection that can really show solidarity with people who feel like that here and now, and yet then conquers that and redeems it. And it's like God scoops right to the very bottom of the sludge of the world and triumphs over it. And I don't think there's any story that's got that power. And obviously its power today, I think, is chiefly shown in people who live by it and communities that believe it. But also, obviously, it's directly available because we hopefully we're half decent adverts for it, but we all struggle and fail and grouchy. But we point to someone who's not who is dependable and full of that grace and acceptance. I was almost pitching then.
Yeah, that's great. Good stuff.
Well, I think I'm quite enjoying this, and I think we're just warming up. Actually, there's a lot more I'd like to know, but I think
you're still there, John.
You've been a bit quiet because we thought you maybe was our long lost brother. And you look a bit like Martin, to be honest.
Well, I still got.
No, he doesn't. John, he doesn't want to be likened to me. He's actually got hair. He's just had a short haircut, haven't you, John?
Yes. Yeah, same here though. I've got a full head of hair. I just choose to have it done like this.
Now, before winding up, it's been very interesting listening to you. I was thinking, you were emphasizing the social gospel a little bit. I thought, because Christians do good work, but then you did go a little bit about, what really is that. It's the change in our hearts that makes Christians really want to do good, I would say. And if just as we wind up, if somebody really felt in their hearts that they wanted to connect with a real God, what do they need to do? Would they? Is it to come to church? How would somebody actually connect with God personally? Who wants to answer that, really?
I wouldn't mind having a go. I mean, we could all say something perhaps, but I mean, we can go directly to God and just call out to Him in prayer. Look, we can say, Lord, if you're there, show me, and He will hear that prayer. But the Lord does give us each other to help us, and the church is meant to be there as representatives of Jesus, people who love Him and would welcome with open arms anyone who wants to inquire and wants to find out more about God and wants to become a follower of Jesus, or know God more. So I would hope that people would feel able to come to church. For some, that's a bit of a step too far, but there's all sorts of ways in which you can engage. There are courses like the Alpha Course about basic Christianity. There are people who are just very happy to listen and answer questions and share their faith with you. So and do make use of the church. And someone's just asked me about doing an Alpha Course, and they don't come to church, but I said, I'd love to do that with you, and maybe a few others.
And I'd recommend people, do pray, and you don't have to do anything special to do that. Have a read of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. But I think words like the social gospel aren't very helpful, to be honest, John, because I think that the gospel is personal and it is social, and it can change lives and it can change communities, change all kinds of things. So it does start with people being open to seeking God, and that can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, because what we're inviting people into is not a private spirituality, but something that, takes hold of our heart, but then completely the idea is that it transforms and affects every part of our life. And we're social beings. We're, a lot of us are fortunate to be in families, but also friendship groups, workplaces, communities. And the thing that made Christianity spread so quickly in the ancient world was not that these people had found some private spirituality that was making them happy. It was that they were transforming communities that welcomed everyone. That was the astonishing thing. In a deeply segregated world, the church was the only place that was for everyone, slaves and masters, men and women on equal status, rich and poor together. And it was extraordinarily attractive. Now, personal transformation is an absolutely crucial part of that, but it's all completely integrated. They're not, as John said, two separate things.
Yeah, I think we have come to an end. I could listen to a lot longer. I don't know if you guys would do it again sometime.
Well, I don't think we've had enough friction. I tried to bring a bit of friction in, so maybe it's been more family and faith. The friction has perhaps not been as strong as it could have been.
I think that's good. I think that's good self-appraisal. But I think if we'd have got too friction, we may have disappeared into Christian jargon land. So no, it's been good to talk with you. I mean, it's a shame we haven't spoken for 5 years, either of us.
I do feel that if we got talking on lots of subjects, there'd be quite a bit that would maybe disagreements, but I think
there might be some.
And I think at the heart, like myself, we have that shared faith in a real God, and that Jesus died for us, has changed our hearts and makes us want to do good things, wants to make a transformation in society, and that transcends all differences. Whether it be, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Can I say a big thank you to those who've put in questions? I'm really sorry that we haven't been able to answer all of them in the time.
I only saw Susie's one. What were the other ones, sir?
Well, I think there were quite a few about.
Where are they then? I haven't seen them. I can't see the questions.
On the right-hand side, but I won't try and read them all out because I don't think we've got time. But I just wanted to say thank you for putting in the questions.
Well, where are the questions? I want to
some way. They're on the right-hand side of my screen, Stephen. It says chat and listed a guy called John the Baptist has written quite a few. Unless that's John pretending to be someone.
John the Baptist here. He thinks you've all got old church buildings.
We've got a very modern building.
That's what they used to call me at my cricket club. But no, and just a shout out to Susie Burridge for putting questions in as well. Much appreciated, Susie.
I can't see these questions.
Good to see you, Susie.
Are we wrapping up, John?
Yeah, I think we better had. I'd love to do it again. Actually, I've quite enjoyed it.
Good. Yep. No.
Yeah,
so well done. Thank you so much.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye,
everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.